Hey everyone! Today I'm going to show you how to make this flowy tiered skirt for stuffed animal. This is perfect for summer and not too hard to make, so let's get started! Okay, first things first, the fabric I used to make this was this kind of shiny pink chiffon. And this is going to give it that flowy look as opposed to the regular cotton fabric I usually use. But you could also use silk or satin for this if you still want it to be flowy, or you could just use cotton fabric and it won't be flowy, but it'll still be a tiered skirt. The first step is of course to cut out the pieces of the pattern, but I didn't cut out paper ones this time because they're just going to be really long rectangles. So I'm just going to talk you through the measurements I did. I first measured around my stuffed animal's waist, which for a Build-A-Bear is around 15 to 16 inches. And then for the top section, I multiplied that measurement by 1.5. And for the bottom section, I multiplied that waist measurement by 2. I only did 2 sections because a stuffed animal compared to like a human's proportions, their legs are not very long. So I didn't want the sections to be too skinny. And for the height of each section, this you can really just check by measuring your stuffed animal's legs and seeing how long you want each section to be. You'll just want to make sure to add a lot of seam allowance. So for the top section, which includes the elastic, I added at least 1.5 inches of seam allowance because my elastic was pretty thick. And then for the lower section, I added at least 1 inch of seam allowance. I'll be honest, I'm saying at least because this was really hard for me to cut out. I think it was just this fabric, but I was not the most accurate with my measurements. But I know I just kept the pieces wider to be safe. But yeah, after being frustrated with that for a while and cutting the cameras, I finally got my 2 rectangles. I'm first going to work on the bottom section, so this thicker one I'm going to set off to the side. And I'm going to start hemming the bottom edge of this. So I'm going to fold over the bottom edge twice to really seal in those frays because this kind of fabric frays really easily. I only made the folds probably less than 1/4 inch, so really as thin as possible. And even just making this double fold and pinning it was a lot of effort, so I decided to just not pin it and make the folds as I go, because as soon as I remove this pin while sewing it, it would probably get unfolded anyway. Here's a little too up close shot of my sewing machine. I'm using a straight stitch to try to sew as close to that top edge as possible without going over. So here's the final result from that. I think as I was sewing, the fabric got stretched a little, which is why there are those kind of diagonal folds at the bottom edge. But I do think it looks kind of pretty. Okay, now I'm going to do something similar to the top edge, except I'm going to only fold it over once. And usually when I sew, I lock my stitch at the beginning and end with a back stitch. But this time I'm not going to do that, and you probably want to set your stitch length to be longer, but I forgot to do that. Okay, so after folding that over and sewing it as I went, I'm going to take one of these threads at the end and start pulling on it. And that'll make the fabric start to gather around that thread. So I'm going to keep scooting down those ruffles towards the other side, or really just towards the middle, because I can do the same thing from the other side. Since this piece is so long, I like to just gather one side of it first and then go to the other side and do it the opposite way. Now you'll want to do this until the top of this is the same length as that other rectangle we cut out, since this is going to get sewn onto that. So to double check, I'm lining them up, and once they're the same length, I'm going to take the ends of the thread and tie them together a few times to lock that length in place. And since I didn't lock my stitch at the beginning either, I'm going to do the same thing for that end. Next, I'm going to set that ruffled piece aside and work on this bigger rectangle. And the first thing I'm going to do is hem this, but I'm actually going to do it the opposite way. So right now I have the good side facing up, and I'm going to fold up the bottom edge a little bit, which is the opposite of what I'd usually do. So now as you can see, the good side of the fabric has that fold showing, but don't worry, it's going to get covered up with the ruffled piece. And the reason I did this is so there wouldn't be as many frayed edges on the back side. Before sewing this on though, I did trim off some extra threads sticking out of that frayed edge so they wouldn't peek through in the front. Now I can line up that ruffled edge with that folded one, making sure it covers that entire fold. And this part didn't feel like a complete waste of time to pin, so I pinned this all the way down to the other side. When I sew this on, I'm going to try my best to sew right along the stitches that are already there, which were the ones I used to gather the top edge. That way it looks a little bit cleaner with only one line of stitches. Okay, here's what it looks like sewn on. I tried my best to get it pretty close, and I think I did a good job. And now I can flip this to the bad side and add that space for where the elastic's going to go. Again, I'm going to do a double fold, which is tricky with this fabric, so you don't have to do it this way. But I'm going to make sure to do a really tiny fold first, and then a very wide one since I want my elastic to be pretty thick. but just make sure it's wide enough to fit your elastic. And again, I was having trouble pinning this, so I just folded this as I went and did a straight stitch. Okay, here is how it's looking now. I got kind of a lump here, but it still had enough space for the elastic and it's not as noticeable once it's all ruffled. And now I can grab my elastic, and since it's a little too thick to fit right now, I'm going to just trim off little pieces until it's the right size. And I forgot to mention, this should be long enough to wrap around your stuffed animal's waist with a little added seam allowance. To make this easier to shimmy through, I'm adding a safety pin to the end, and then I can insert it into that top fold and start scrunching the fabric down and around that safety pin until it can't really hold anymore, and then I'll just pull that down around the elastic. Just keep doing that until it makes it to the other side of the fabric. But once that elastic gets further and further in, you'll want to make sure the end is still visible and doesn't get sucked inside, which is what happened to me, and the only solution for that is to just keep going to the other side and then restart. So what I like to do when there's only a little sticking out like this is pin it to the end of that fabric. Then I can keep moving that safety pin through till it comes out the other side. Next, I can fold this in half, good side to good side, and pull out the elastic just a little bit so it doesn't accidentally get sucked in. And then I'm going to pin along this side because that's the last thing we really need to do to close up this skirt. But my bottom section was a little long, so I first trimmed that off. And now I can sew along this edge with a straight stitch. After that, this flowy tiered skirt is done. I think I did one more thing to clean up this raw edge, and that was just trim it a little bit and then do a zigzag stitch over the edge to help prevent fraying a little bit, but that's optional. And once that's done, I trimmed off a few more threads in that middle section, and now it's finally ready to try on. I paired this with this ruffled top, which I made as like my second video ever, but I thought it looked better with a white top, so I literally just used some scrap fabric to wrap around her top. And that's why there's some footage of that from the intro. My family recently took a trip to Hawaii, and this was the perfect outfit for her to wear, so that's where the intro was filmed. But yeah, that is it for this video. I really hope you all enjoyed it, and whoever requested this likes it. If you missed my community post, I announced that when I reach 10,000 subscribers, I'll be doing a face reveal, which might be a little too early, but I've been making the same type of videos for a while, so it'll be cool to switch it up. So make sure you subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you next time. Bye!